Excellent. Thank you for joining us for an episode of Curious Careers. It's my pleasure to welcome Simon to this episode of Curious Careers. Simon is the founder and president of Firehouse Communications. Today we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. Thank you for joining us, Simon.
Thank you very much. Great to be here. Love the business school and had a happy association 15 years or so.
Excellent. Thank you. Before we really dive into the interview, please, Simon, give us a little introduction about yourself and what you're doing with your current company, Firehouse Communications, and your entrepreneurial background, please.
Absolutely. Well, I've set up 3 companies and advised probably a dozen major entrepreneurial businesses. And on the side, I've set up 6 charities, which between them have raised 70 million sterling. I'm hoping to get to 100 by the end of my career. I haven't actually been out to raise money for myself, which I know is an area of great interest to some of your students. The approach I've taken with those 3 businesses, all in consulting, communications consulting, various arms thereof, has been to use the customer cash flow effectively to finance the business. And that is obviously the safest route. It's the most conventional route in a service business. About 70% of entrepreneurs are technical experts, if you like, in their areas of practice. There are a lot of new law firms now, actually, with lawyers behaving more and more like entrepreneurs. We've just seen a major listing of one law firm, I think, a few weeks ago. So, the edges are blurring between the professions and being an entrepreneur. And certainly we serve a lot of entrepreneurs. So currently I'm advising a couple of unicorns. One is about to list on NASDAQ, which is in the COVID testing arena. 2 years ago, employed 12 people. Now employs 700 people, 1.7 billion valuation. Another one I can't name is about to come to the market as a carpooling business, likely to be in London now. Again, a very fast start and fast track. So it's very energizing, certainly, to work with clients like that. I also co-founded a business in New York that's now turning over 60 million, which in our space is quite a lot to do. And we are growing on a sort of hub and spoke model at the moment, effectively a senior boutique advisory firm, typically at C-suite level in major corporates and service firms.
Excellent. That really sounds very interesting, and we will deep dive into that a little bit later in the interview. But I'm going to ask you to cast your mind back to when you started your career. So my understanding is you started your career as a diplomat before moving into corporate finance. How did you find that these roles influenced or supported your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I have a cute answer and a truthful answer. The cute answer is I'm now arguably in a form of corporate diplomacy. So that was a natural segue in with an investor relations dimension. Certainly the banking and finance training has come invariably and useful, particularly with listing work, but actually we've advised a lot of investment banks over the last 20 years as well. Typically, again, the emerging high growth ones like Corppoint, Jefferies, RW Baird, and so forth. The truthful answer is, you're allowed a certain amount of happenstance in life. I happened to read history at university. I had a great interest in politics, in fact, and geostrategy, so was lucky enough to get into the Foreign Office for 4 years. I liked it so much that I thought I'd better go and make some money and become a politician. Those were the days when politicians made their money before they went in rather than advising companies while they're in. Pache 1 or 2 recent senior departures. And I really enjoyed the city. I was lucky to work at 2 of the top investment banks, Climate Benson, Europe's largest at that point, with about 25 FTSE clients, and NM Rothschild, who actually were just beginning to take off and have become a truly great global bank now from more boutique-y family beginnings. And they were kind enough to sort of tolerate my running for office every so often. I ended up becoming chairman of finance of the UK's largest local authority in an elected role, responsible for $2 billion budget, a lot of which we, in fact, privatised the private sector. We would argue improving services and saving the ratepayer money. I had a run at Parliament and worked at Conservative Central Office, but all as a sidebar at that point to a career in corporate communications, because I worked out that probably my USP was words rather than numbers. And here we are today.
Excellent. And Sounds like you were really successful in your career up to
So
that
I am a
point.
PR person, so I'm not going to give you another version. I was
Exactly.
quite successful for a 2-1 historian from an ancient university, yes, including in the Foreign Office, actually, but leave that for another day.
Excellent. And what was your driving factor for becoming an entrepreneur, for making that switch? Because that's a massive switch that you did.
I think, and amongst the list of reading I'm going to be proposing is a book I've yet to write called The Accidental Entrepreneur, because there are a handful of people who knowingly drop out of great colleges and set up Microsoft or Apple or Oracle. Most of us actually don't. Most of us achieve a certain level of success and then notice what could be done better. And what I noticed in the big agency model, and I was chief executive of one of Europe's top 3 financial and corporate communications firms in my mid-30s, was that the senior people didn't really do the work. They got promoted out of being useful to their clients. And there were a handful of exceptions, the big names in our industry, who always kept close to the clients because they had enough infrastructure. But I was spending 70% of my time running people, building the business, doing joint ventures overseas, and auditing the paper clips. And I thought that was not the best use of my particular skill set, actually. And I constantly in life wished I'd had a COO. But the challenge in a people business of a COO is that the people working with you are really there to see how you do it, if you know what I mean. So that laying off of the leadership role was a little bit difficult to do. Now it's much easier on the model we've got, where we've got 15 or so senior partners and a bench of junior people who work from home, and many of whom do other things. You know, they run art galleries, they're doing second degrees, they're learning languages, or playing sports at high level, and are very happy with a sort of 3 or 4 day week model, which we may all be moving to shortly, indeed.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about actually your current company, because I'm really interested to find out a little bit behind the scenes. So your current company is called Firehouse Communications. Can you tell me what the company does to start off, please?
Yes, I mean, we first of all, we've got projects in all areas running live at the moment. Typically, we get brought in by the board who says the press doesn't like us very much. Go and fix the press. Normally, we find out fairly quickly the reason the press doesn't like them very much is that there may actually be underlying issues that they might be addressing in terms of the brand, in terms of their communication skills. Reputation management is the sort of broad label that we work with. And we're now working on a consumer business, actually, portal on their relaunch as a brand. And that extends into quite a high level of detail on how they present themselves in every area, working with other specialists. And then we're going to launch a media and communications strategy, including influencer outreach, appointment of ambassadors, possibly advisory board members, possibly also finessing the investor story. So that's quite a full suite of activity. We also represent governments, so actually my diplomacy did prepare me a little bit for that, and we report to 2 heads of mission in London, and we've done a lot of work with overseas governments. We only do NATO and the EU before you wonder about the character of some of these governments, and that's the route I think we've rightly chosen ethically, and our people are comfortable with that. And it means that very senior people take our call, and I've done work for the Cabinet Office and the British Army and others on the strength of that sort of discretion, if I can put it that way. We don't name our clients typically, actually, certainly not the government clients, but they're ones you will have heard of, and they're doing good things. And then we also have developed over the last 3 years a quasi-marketing role. And I think one of the lessons of successful entrepreneurship is, even within the 2 companies I've run over the last 25 years that I've owned, they've probably between them had 5 or 6 iterations, because we started as a .com promotional business, which was terribly good until 9/11. Actually, the market blew up about 6 months before. We seeded into financial services, which was jolly good until we saw people in the street queuing outside the bank tills at Bradford and Bingley. And then we became a more general corporate business with a sort of government consulting side as well. And most recently, we're now reporting to directors of marketing on lead or partner origination, because one of the things in life is there is a moment where the value of your network begins to be part of the toolkit, if I can put it that way. And we've done a bit of executive search. We would argue very cost effectively for our clients, and certainly we've had some success there. And we put together 1 or 2 trade partnerships over the last 2 years that have been of really quite high value to the participants. And as consultants on the call will know, one of the great things we're all trying to do is break out of a time cost based model into one where you can take a share of the action, be it equity raised or sales delivered.
Excellent. You really alluded to some of the high profile clients that you have. Appreciate you can't name them, but any entrepreneur who's listening to this at the moment, a customer base is vital to them actually starting their firm and to being successful. What advice would you give an entrepreneur on the call of actually starting their customer base? Who to target? How do they actually get those first customers on board?
Well, you make a fantastic point there. And in the other book I'm writing called The Rules of the Rainmaker, I make the point that there's a lot of discussion about the business model, about obviously cost management, proper staffing, the team. But actually all of that doesn't work without revenue. I mean, there are a handful of exceptions who started with no revenue and created a new market. We can debate about whether Tesla and Apple did that. And Tesla, of course, has a marvelous model I wish I'd thought of, which is to set up the world's 3rd largest company without ever making a profit. I hadn't sort of cottoned on to that one. I trust you're teaching it, David, at your great school. But a lot of the dot-coms went that way and actually achieved quite high valuations, and we were associated with 2 of the big ones that exited very well. So the revenue, how do you start? Well, first of all, you start by building a bed of contacts, ideally, if you're selling a high-value service, which we are. Typically, that will be based on word of mouth, referral, relationships based over a long time, and so forth. And I have a very simple rule with offering clients a service, which is it has to be quicker, better, and I'm afraid to say cheaper. I used to not like going in and competing on price because I thought I'm just as good as I was when I was carrying global overhead. But the reality is you aren't carrying a global overhead, and you are offering in a smaller owner-manager business, and we over the years have issued equity to all our people actually in various forms, that that is the absolute essence, I think, of success. You've got to bear those things in mind, and that does actually work for products as well as services. Quicker, better, cheaper, and you just need to get the word out. I think in the digital age, because I mean, I launched my first firm, and the client on day one actually said, "So Simon, you set up your own firm. We're very excited. Are you going to have email?" he said, and he became my largest founding client. I explained we were going to have email, and he might want to look at it a bit as well, and. That I think was that was a former client who wanted something else, and we grew very quickly with that first firm, and became reasonably sized and so forth. This firm I'm trying to keep tight, and we're really focusing on that sort of laser level work apart from the sales development side, where we could land a 7-figure commission on the right deal there, and that becomes very interesting in our world.
Excellent. Really great information there for our students and our base community. Funding is obviously a challenge for any new business that's starting up. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into your previous businesses, or maybe Firehouse Communications, how you actually raised funds for your venture, or if you did raise funds?
Well, we did actually. When we set up the firm before, or Qubit, we all the founders put in a few tens of thousands each. We had 100,000 between us to kick off, which was about 3 months working capital, we thought, with the people we had. So that was a risk. And then we took on quickly a couple of six-figure accounts. And we ran a model which a lot of agencies used to do, it's less popular now, which was billing quarterly in advance on 30 days payment. And we had marvelous clients who knew exactly what we were trying to do, and that if we were successful, we would be good for them. And they sort of kicked in those payments pretty quickly. And, we ran 32-day average debtor days, which compares with, I think, 45 nationally. And actually, we now have quite a lot of 7-day payment contracts. So, and we're very lucky again with our client base who will pay on issue because they know we're going to do the business.
Yeah, excellent. A few personal questions, if you don't mind. Can you tell us, as an entrepreneur, can you describe your typical day, what it is you actually get up to? Are you running the business? Are you talking to staff, clients? What's the breakdown of your day look like, please?
Probably, for me, it's 30% talking to clients. I'm always staggered how heavy the writing load is in advisory papers, notes, draft media releases, outreach to media, and obviously ideas on the sales side, and probably 3 hours a day are spent literally writing. So I'd probably do about 2,000-3,000 words a day myself, and some of my colleagues would do about the same. Then we're always prospecting. You talked about revenue, so we're always out looking for stuff. For reasons I find, very, very worrying for the people I met out there. I've in fact got on the last plane out of Kiev on Friday, where I was representing a leading technology and AI manufacturer in the civilian sector, who may yet be actually relevant, I think, even in the current, stress and emergency there. I've traveled a lot, I'd say. I travel a lot. I'm probably in 4 or 5 countries every quarter at the moment, and we are a very international focused business. I don't do staff evaluations anymore, which I love. I deal with peers, and we tell each other what we think, and I get evaluated very regularly. And actually, I read a lot is the other thing in my business. So we are out there gathering market intelligence for our clients. Some of that intelligence is knowing what's in the major international media by 8 in the morning. So I'm normally hitting the papers at sort of 6:45 or 6. And the Today program starts my day with the business segment at 6:15, as it does for many people. So it's a literary life in a way. I probably, certainly in the old days, one would do 5 or 6 personal meetings a day, probably, but those are now half-hour Zooms, which is actually much more civilized in a way,
Okay.
I think.
Excellent, thank you. It's great insights into your typical day. What is your favorite aspect of being an entrepreneur? What makes you get up and do it every day? Why do you do it?
I think it's the accountability, and there have been long nights on client crises where you thought, could I really do this if I were on a paycheck? Would I really have that commitment, morally, ethically, intellectually? And I'd like to think I would, but it does make a huge difference knowing that you're personally going to let somebody down, and that's true of all colleagues in the organization. Whereas there are large organizations I work with and in, where nobody ever quite knows who's responsible for what has gone well or hasn't gone well. So I think you've got to enjoy that. I think there's an element of A-type narcissism in a lot of us. Some of the entrepreneurs out there, one might say, are extreme A-type narcissists even. So you've got to enjoy, I think, being on the hook for something. And I have, if we have time for that, I've got sort of 1 or 2 thoughts. The key point about entrepreneurs is we tend to be slightly unbalanced individuals in terms of our skill set. I've just read the marvelous book by Malcolm Gladwell, whose stuff I commend warmly, who's pointed out that he reckons 50% of really successful entrepreneurs are dyslexic, for instance, because they compensate with all the other stuff. And people like you and me, who are brought up with a way of dealing with papers and sort of marking them up, maybe miss a lot that those really great entrepreneurs have. So, and my solution to that is look for a team, because you really need diversity in the team, and we certainly have done that, I think, in our prior firm, and we're working on it in our firm at the moment. But we do value intellectual diversity as well as demographic diversity.
Excellent. Thank you. A lot of the people who are on this call are going to be entrepreneur people who want to be entrepreneurs in the future, or maybe they're entrepreneurs in the current time. What would you give as a final question before I let you go? What 3 pieces of advice would you give our community on how to start their entrepreneurial journey?
Well, I'm going to cheat because I've done one, haven't I? I've said build a team. And actually starting something absolutely solo is quite tough. And I've been very lucky in having people I respected who were available at the right time and who I knew I'd learn from and would fill in my own weaknesses. And that is one of the great joys of teamwork. The second piece of advice I've got is to refer you to the excellent Bayes Business School talk called The Rules of the Rainmaker, which is a codex for, I gave the talk, by the way, dear audience, a codex for really how to generate revenue sustainably over a lifetime in work. And that's the thing that will keep you employed. Unfortunately, there is ageism there. And if you're over 40 and aren't bringing in revenue or relationships, there are very few roles outside the finance function at the top of an organization. And the last thing I wanted to commend was just bear in mind that entrepreneurial life is not linear. It's not a ladder. You're in a boat on the open sea, and you'll see more interesting places in time than you would if you were climbing a ladder, perhaps stuck in one place, but ascending effortlessly. And you've got to enjoy that, I think. There's a little bit of the sort of, naval captain or sailor, great transatlantic sailor in all of us. We enjoy those big waves when they come, and sometimes you go through a trough. Elon Musk again was within 24 hours. He reports of bankrupting Tesla in the late in 2011-12. May have got the date wrong, but and I've seen that with 1 or 2 clients of mine who've come very close, and they keep their calmness and resolve and get through with their team. And so it won't be easy, but it will be fun.
Excellent. Thank you. That is great advice. I'm going to let you go. Thank you to the Bayes community. Thank you to Simon. There's fantastic advice there for this episode of Curious Careers. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Cheers.